Hi there. So before I start, I have a bit of a stutter, so if that makes it hard to understand, then I apologize. Hopefully it won't be too bad. So I sent a tweet out a few days ago. I love JavaScript with statement so much. And I got a reply from Chow Bianchi, I think you say his name. I love the JavaScript with statements so much, with sarcasm tags around it. He thought I was being sarcastic. Actually, he forgot the opening tag, so maybe he was saying everything that I've ever tweeted is like sarcastic. However, I guess from this point on, I can't be sarcastic because he just like closed the sarcasm tag on me. So there we go. Anyway. Oh, and then I got this one. Whatever, yeah. All right, so by way of introduction, I work at Twitter. Twitter, we love JavaScript. We love the front end. We take the time to understand everything, understand all the parts, so that we have the widest toolkit at our disposal. We don't believe in just restricting the language to the so-called safe parts, or the bits you should be able. And I think we get a lot of strength from that. And we do everything in strict mode, just in case you thought we were not very careful or something like that. So why am I making this talk? Why did I write it? There were two motivations for this talk. The first one is kind of represented this quote by Douglas Crockford. He says the subset he carved out is vastly superior to the language as a whole. Now, much as I love the good parts and think it's a great book, and I think every JavaScript developer should read it, I think the other parts are really great as well. The parts he leaves out, if you take the time to understand them, they are great and they're really useful and they add a lot to the language, and it saddens me that not enough people are actually looking into them. So that was one of the motivations. The other one is this. I see this all the time and it drives me crazy. It's like Stack Overflow. You're reading a fairly interesting thread and inevitably someone comes along and says that. And it's like, you're not telling me, you're not explaining it, you're not saying why I shouldn't use it, you're just telling me not to use it. Like, why are you telling me this? Because someone told you? We can't be good developers unless we take the time to understand it, and we should not preach things to other people that we can't explain or we're not willing to convince others of. That's very important to me. So, why do we have rules? Well, rules help us to do it right. That's the theory. But who makes the rules? Whose rules are we actually following here? And I think right and rules apply to everything, not just to software. They apply to life. They even apply to soup. Here's right as it applies to soup. So, let me ask you something. What is an authentic minestrone soup? Does anyone know? Well, I tell you what, we can do a search. Google Images will have the answer. Let's key in authentic minestrone soup and see what we get. Oh shit. Turns out there is no such thing. There is no authentic minestrone soup. It's whatever you want it to be. And actually, the technical answer is, it's a regional soup and different parts of Italy make the soup in a different way. The point is, we can't tell other people how to make minestrone soup. And I guess that was meant to come next. And the bigger point is correctness is subjective. There is no one correctness that we all share. We cannot listen to one person's story of what correctness is and apply it to our development. Each of us is unique and individual. Each of us, we all have our own opinion on what we consider harmful. These are all copied, pasted from actual articles. And you can see everything in JavaScript has ever done has been considered harmful by someone, like if considered harmful, primitive types, arguments, JavaScript considered harmful. And so, you know, oh, and look, there we are. And just to really throw a spanner in the works, somebody actually wrote an article, eval considered useful. So clearly harmful is subjective too. Otherwise we wouldn't be writing any code at all. I really like this quote from Swiss author Germain de Stiel. I think I'm saying that right. Rules are only barriers to prevent children from falling. We should keep that in mind. That's really important. So when you start out, when you learn a language, you know, rules are really important. They stop you falling off the edge, stop you doing something really stupid. But, you know, we're not children anymore, right? We're adults. We, like most of us in this room, probably consider ourselves fairly good JavaScript developers. We'd want to code the way an adult codes. And once we understand the rules, we should be able to break them, find out the exceptions, find out when the rules don't apply to what we're actually trying to do. Is Thomas here in the audience? Thomas, I apologize for this. Singapore, everything runs smoothly, everything's clean, everything's nice, but there's a bit of a cost for that. It's the expense of personal freedom. Not everyone has the liberty to do everything they want to do. And I think Java is Singapore. Actually, yeah. Thank you. Actually, I didn't come up with this. I stole this from Andrew Dupont, who said it at a great JSConf talk 2 years ago, I think. So, ask yourself, how Singapore do you want JavaScript to be? That's pretty important. This is a great quote. I really love this quote. This is pretty old now. This is from 11 years ago. I think it's still Wikipedia policy, and it's one of their great strengths. They have guidelines, they have rules, but they're very quick to point out if it holds you back, if it prevents you creating the site, the page you want to create, then ignore it. Again, I think we should be adult enough to do the same thing. Okay, so we talked about breaking rules. How to break them? Let's start with my own favorite, the with statement. So to be sure, there's a lot to be careful about when using the with statement. You shouldn't just use it indiscriminately. Here are a few reasons not to use it. Accidental clobbering and implicit global creation is very easy to do. Here's an example. Looks pretty cool on the face of it, okay? We have an object literal. We're using a with to make another object literal-like statement to, oh, sorry, there we go, to update the dragger that we just created. You wouldn't really get these two lines next to each other, but one of them on the same slide. But look, I accidentally misnamed increment as interval, an easy mistake to make. And all hell broke loose. I've now created a global called interval. It's pretty easy to do. Should be careful about that. Oh, the obligatory ironic footnote is with ES5 strict mode, they protect against implicit global creation. So the biggest egregious fault with the with statement would have actually gone away with ES5. Unfortunately, ES5 doesn't support the with statement. It's kind of sad. To be fair, the compiler costs might have been prohibitive because trying to figure out with a with statement whether globals were being clobbered, a lot of browser vendors would have complained that was actually prohibitively expensive. So that might be the real reason there isn't a with statement in ES5 strict mode. Okay, carrying on with reasons not to use the with statement. Cost of closure scope resolution. So with adds an extra scope. So as you're going up the closure chain, looking for trying to resolve, that's an extra step to go up. In practice, I think the way modern browsers work, it's an exaggerated concern. I don't think it slows browsers down that much. And the cost of late compilation. We need to resolve the effective property access and assignments. We can't do that till runtime, so it's an extra compile step. Again, not sure how much that costs. Maybe sometimes it is a significant cost. Turning to the positive, why is it useful? Well, you probably know it powers your developer tools. That's if you use Chrome or Safari or Firebug. Here's an example taken from Chrome source code, Chrome developer tools source code. And actually, this is very slightly old. They've changed this, but this particular excerpt was a very good illustration of what happens. So you may know that the WebKit console has this command line API, which makes available extra functions such as the inspect function, things like that, which you can just use on the console. They're all within this object window.inspector command line API. But what if you wanted in the console to override those functions? The user of the console should be able to clobber those functions. This is a very neat and incidentally very safe way to do that. You have a with window statement nested inside a with window inspector command line. So absolute priority will be given to the global object. And so if you redefine inspect, it'll get to that one first. Then it'll get to the inspector command line API. Why is it safe? Nothing can ever slip through the global object because you're actually including it there. Another reason it's useful, a lot of people like Blockscope. So ES6 is going to be introducing support for Blockscope. With statement is a pretty neat and fairly safe way to replicate Blockscope. Let me show you by illustration. So you've all seen this one, right? This is like a cautionary tale of how closures don't always work. So because there's only one scope here, the variable I is being shared through each iteration, which means the alert statement ends up pointing to node's length. Every single alert alerts node's length at the end. The traditional way to solve that is with a function closure, right? You've all seen this, I'm sure. So now we're introducing a scope inside a scope. So I is unique. Each I is unique within the function scope that we created. Then everything works great. It's a little bit clunky. It's not very intuitive, and people coming from other languages don't really think it's a bit over the top having to do this. So you could have a with statement, and here's the key. Another key to using with in a safe way is don't pass a variable where in a variable we don't know what's in there. Pass an explicit hash so you know what's there. Pass I as a hash. Then you can only own it. So there's no danger of a sane person trying to set anything else in this with loop other than I, because it's clear that that's all that's actually there. So nothing will be accidentally clobbered, and it's kind of lightweight, I think, compared to the function thing. Actually, to be honest, it's slightly slower, but so it depends if performance is a concern to you. But I think it's a fairly neat illustration. And oh, by the way, there is a let statement coming in ES6, but like we know that's not going to be there on all browsers for quite a long time. So this is a kind of standby, I guess. The eval statement, everyone's other favorite thing you should never do. Why shouldn't you do it? Well, we all know about code injection loophole. If a user gets, or if some third party gets their hands on the argument, the eval argument, they can invoke any code they want to. Also prevents closure optimization because a lot of modern browsers, all modern browsers I think, they will only persist those variables on the outer scope that have to be persisted. So they'll look what's referenced in the inner scope. With eval, you don't really know what you're going to be referencing there, so it inhibits optimization. I'm not sure with Chrome and the latest Firefox how much of a problem that is. But anyway, that's something you don't get if you have an eval statement. And again, as with the with statement, the cost of late compilation. So you have to compile at runtime, basically. Why is it useful? Most obvious one is when there's no JSON pass, so like IE7, for example. There's no ability to have a native JSON pass in the browser. These are a couple of accepted answers from Stack Overflow, basically saying the same thing, to the effect that you should never use eval, it's really unsafe. Use json.org, it's much, much safer. Okay? Let's have a look at json.org. Well, if your browser didn't actually support the eval, JSON pass, it uses eval. So this is why you should watch Stack Overflow, because often accepted answers are just completely wrong. Why else is it useful? It's how your console works. The same as the with statement. So you can try this now. Go to bin or to any WebKit console, run this code. Anything that you evaluate, the eval statement is what actually calls it. This is just saying what is the caller of the function. The eval statement calls. They use the eval statement for everything. It's used every time you run something. Here's a quote I really like from John Hessick of jQuery fame. It's like the sensible antidote to the Crockfordism. It's like, basically he says, eval and with are trivialized, misused, and outright condemned by most JavaScript programmers, but when used appropriately, they allow for the creation of some fantastic pieces of code that wouldn't be possible otherwise. I think that's really cool, and I wish more people would pay attention to this kind of thing. This is the cousin of the eval statement. Slightly nicer cousin in most people's view. Although I've heard it said it's only nicer because it isn't an eval statement, therefore you can say you're not using eval, but you actually are. That's not really true. It's not just an eval in disguise, it's much more besides that. In particular, it always evaluates code in the child of the global scope. So it creates a brand new scope every time to execute in, which is one down from the global scope, which means it only has closure reference to the global scope and to nothing else. And we'll see in a second why that's a good thing, or can be a good thing in the right context. Let's look at a couple of cases why it's useful, or actually, talking about what I just said. You know your evaluated code will always run in the same scope, or not the same scope, but an equivalent scope every time. Now, it's pretty bad anyway if a third party gets hold of your eval argument, but at least with new function, only the globals are exposed. They can't get deep down into the local code because they'll never be available in the scope chain. And finally, there's no closure optimization concerns because the only variables that in the scope chain are the global variables, which are there the whole time. They're always persisted, so there's no issues there. It's used in jQuery's pastjson, which is a kind of variation on json.org's version. It uses the eval, it substitutes the eval for a function constructor, as we can see here. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same. And this is, again, presumably to restrict access to local variables, and because at least in theory, less scope chaining means performance improvement. So I just leave that code up in case you didn't see it. Where else is it used? Underscorejs has a pretty nifty string interpolation method. And it uses our favorite with statement first. What this interpolation lets you do is you can optionally give a context in which you want this string to be interpolated, to be evaluated in. If you don't give a context, it'll just create an object hash here. So it'll either run it in the given context or just create an object hash. In the latter case, with an object hash, it will then use it in a new function constructor. So the default hash doesn't run in your local scope, it runs in the new function scope, which makes a lot of sense because since you clearly stated you don't care what scope it runs in, okay, I'm going to run it in the quickest and safest possible scope. So I think that's cool, and that's a good example of where with and the new function constructor work quite nicely together. Running a bit short on time, so I'm going to speed up a bit now. Equals equals. How many people use it? Okay, that's pretty good. Not as good as I hoped, but pretty good. Why are you not meant to use it? Coerces operands to the same type. So if you have a string and a number, it'll coerce them. What other? Oh, that's it actually. That's the only reason. So why is it useful? Oh, because it coerces operands to the same type. Sometimes you really don't care if the user has input a string or a number. If it's quote 2 or 2, you don't care. Is it going to evaluate to 2? It's useful. If you are doing that, you should put a comment though to let people know that's why you're using equals equals, because otherwise it might confuse them. And then there's this thing, undefined is equals to null, which is pretty handy because JavaScript has two nothings. It has null and undefined, and some people do if x triple equals null or x triple equals undefined. But that's a mouthful and is logically identical to x equals to null. And you see a lot of libraries like jQuery use the x equals null. They use that the whole time. Just makes a lot more sense. It does exactly the same thing. And also, if it's obvious, why the hell are you using triple equal? Like, type of is always a string. Result of type of can never be anything other than a string. So type of something equals function, well, like, yeah, you know. You might as well do an equals. Similarly, length and index are all always a number. And I mean, this is a matter of style, but I actually prefer equals in this sense because it's more declarative. I'm being very transparent. I'm saying to the reader of my code, I actually know these are the same things. That's why I'm using an equals comparator, or rather operator. If I put triple equals, it suggests I don't actually know it's the same type. Personal preference, that's how I like to do it. Oh, and here's number 2 in our obligatory ironic footnote series. A lot of the people who avoid equals, with impunity, they use if something the whole time. Well, that's coercion too. So it's like, why is one type of coercion okay and the other type not? And it's not even the same coercion. So either they've understood the if coercion, but not the equals one. Not sure why you would want to take the time to understand one and not the other. Or they don't understand if coercion, but because Crockford said it's okay, they're just basically going ahead and using it. And here's an example of why the two coercion types are not the same. So, you know, if potato evaluates to true, but actually potato is not equals true. So there we go. Array constructor. So, right, you're not supposed to create arrays. This is not how you're supposed to create arrays, right? But what about this? This is the most beautiful thing, and you need the array constructor to do this. You've probably seen this. This is from prototype.js, and it's a way to repeat a string X number of times. And it basically creates an empty array of X plus 1 times, and uses as your glue, as the glue, the string that you provided to it. I think it's ultra cool, and it makes me really sad that some people will never use this or will never want to see this in their code because they followed a rule that somebody once said and they never really took the time to understand it. So there we go. Oh, wrong direction. So people that broke these rules also like to break these rules. And I'm running out of time. There's way too many rules, so I'm going to be really, really quick. But I just wanted to make it clear these aren't the only rules. So again, Andrew DuPont 2 years ago at JSConf gave the best talk about extending native prototypes. Just to quickly say, sometimes it's sensible. I think ES5 shims are one case where it's sensible. hasOwnProperty on for-in, well, you know, if you created the hash yourself and you didn't extend it, and you didn't extend object prototype, there's no way you could be bringing anything else into your iteration. And I bet you 9 times out of 10 when you do a for-in iteration, that is exactly the case. The other thing is, what's so bad about prototypes? Sometimes we want the prototype to. I've done for-in loops where I want prototype objects to leak into my for-in iteration too. So it's all a question of what you actually want in the iteration. Put all var statements at the top. Well, good advice most of the time, but in for loops, it's frankly unintuitive because you're looking for where it was defined up at the top. There's no reason to ever define it up at the top in a for loop. Don't declare a function after you use it. This is basically the hoisting thing, like function declarations do function hoisting. I sometimes find it really useful to hide the implementation details further down the page where the person looking at my code might not care what the implementation is, but they like to see where is it used. How is the function? And I find that actually pretty good. Comma operator, as Jez said, I basically wrote the essay on this one. I could give you 100 reasons to use it, but I'll just give you one. If you want to use multiple expressions where the syntax only expects a single one, like the second and third arguments of a for loop are really good examples of that. And the one I hate is always pass 10 to pass in. I mean, unless you're starting with a 0 or an x, there's no reason to have to pass 10 to a pass in. So, in summary, it's okay to break a rule if you understand why the rule exists in the first place. You can mitigate or safely ignore. In other words, the concerns don't apply to what you're trying to use it for. And maybe most importantly, it adds something. Like there's a reason to break the rule. And here I might mention semicolons. I think semicolons, contrary to what you might read, they're pretty easy to understand why and how automatic semicolon insertion works. I'm fine with people not using them. I personally don't leave them out because it doesn't add anything either. It's very easy to put a semicolon. In this case, sticking to the convention doesn't really cost me anything. Leaving it out is not really going to add anything to the code. So there we go. This is a quote from an author. I don't know anything about the author, but I really like the quote. And I think it really sums up pretty nicely what I'm trying to say, which is become an expert at the rules, then break them with creativity and style. And like the TLDR takeaway from this, if you didn't listen to anything else, just listen to this, is be good, and if you can't be good, be careful. Thank you.
So we're only a little bit over time. There is 10 minutes until the next break. Or do we have, maybe, I think this is such a great opportunity to have this guy speaking to answer questions. And I know there's so many, I mean, personally, I would have questions that I'd want to ask him about stuff like this. But do we have questions? If you want to leave, not rude at all, go out and you can, have a beverage. But if we have questions, maybe entertain one or two while we have them here. Is that cool? I see one in the back. 1 second. Oprah style.
Great talk. I agree with you on a lot of this. I think most of these rules exist for teams where the team is fairly large and not everybody's a JavaScript programmer. Don't you think that as well?
Yes, I was going to add a slide about that. I did actually have a slide about that, and I took it out. I think teamwork is a good idea to have some conventions that the whole team should follow. And I guess all I'm saying is, yeah, sure, have those conventions, but decide amongst yourselves what those conventions should be. Don't listen to what other people say. Understand the rules as a team, understand how you want to employ them.
Anyone else? All right, cool. Thank you so much.